Hello and welcome. It's time to bring you up to date with what's happening globally and in Nigeria. The news story says Lai picks Taiwan's ex-US envoy as running mate. Argentina elects reformist outsider Javier Milei. Qatar PM says minor hurdles to Israel-Hamas captive deal. Macron to Netanyahu, excessive civilian losses in Gaza, and deal for release of dozens held hostage by Hamas ongoing. On election matters, the front-runner for the presidency in Taiwan's 2024 elections, William Lai, has named Hsiao Bi-khim, the self-ruled island's former envoy to the United States, as his running mate. Lai, the candidate for the governing Progressive Party (DPP) and the man leading most opinion polls ahead of the January 13th election, said 52-year-old Hsiao was the right person for the job. Lai said he will officially present Hsiao as his running mate on Monday afternoon on a post on social media. Taiwan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said it had accepted her resignation. Taiwan is preparing for elections at a time when Beijing has become progressively assertive in its claims to the democratic island, which it says is part of China. It has not ruled out the use of force to achieve its goal. The DPP, which won power in 2016 under President Tsai Ing-wen, has said it is up to Taiwan's people to choose their future. Like Lai, Hsiao is hated by China, which has twice placed sanctions on her, most recently in April, calling her an independence diehard. Last week, China's Taiwan Affairs Office referred to Lai and Hsiao as an independence double act, adding that Taiwan's people were very clear about what their partnership meant for the situation in the Taiwan Strait. It did not give further details. In August, China carried out military exercises around Taiwan after Lai returned from a brief visit to the US. The Chinese military said its exercises were a serious warning against Taiwanese independent separatist forces colluding with external forces to provoke it. Still on election matters, Argentina has elected Libertarian outsider Javier Milei as its next president, taking a chance on the unconventional economist program of essential economic reform after decades of stagnation. Milei's win barrier a dramatic shake-up of the Latin American country's economy and institutions amidst public rage over high inflation and record poverty rates under the center-left Peronist coalition. On Sunday night, in an address to Argentinians, Milei said his victory marked the beginning of the reconstruction of Argentina. In the capital, Buenos Aires, hundreds of Milei supporters hung horns, set off fireworks, and chanted his popular refrain against the political elite, "Out with all of them," as rock music played. Sergio Massa, economic minister, earlier accepted defeat as provisional results in the runoff election showed Milei with 56% of the vote to his 44%, with almost 90% of votes counted. Milei is self-described anarcho-capitalist, has promised a series of radical reforms, including slashing public spending by 15%, eliminating the central bank, and switching the Argentinian peso to the United States dollar. The 53-year-old political maverick, whose abrasive style has drawn comparisons from former US President Donald Trump, has also staked out conservative positions on social issues, opposing abortion and sex education and railing against political correctness. He has also questioned the death toll under Argentina's dictatorship, attacked Pope Francis, and denied that humans are responsible for climate change. Milei's attacks against the thieving political class hit a chord with Argentinians, particularly young women, amidst growing poverty and triple-digit inflation in the Latin American country, which has tripped from economic crisis to crisis for decades. Away from election matters, now to Israel-Palestine war, Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani has said only minor challenges remain to a deal to release some of the over 200 people taken captive in Gaza after Hamas's attack on Israel last month. A former foreign minister, Sheikh Mohammed, gave few additional details on a timeline. The challenges that remain in the negotiations are very minor compared to the bigger challenges. They are more logistical, they are more practical, he told a joint press conference with the European Union's foreign policy chief, Joseph Borrell. Qatar has been acting as an intercessor in talks to free those taken captive in Hamas's surprise attack on Israel on October 7th, in which at least 1,200 people were killed. Israel launched a persistent air and ground campaign on the besieged Gaza Strip after the attack, bombarding the densely populated territory in an attempt to destroy Hamas. Over 13,000 people have been killed in the week since. Borrell, who was due to meet Qatar's emir before traveling to Jordan, called for the unconditional release of all captives and condemned Hamas for the attack. According to reports on November 15th, Qatari mediators had been seeking a deal between Israel and Hamas to exchange 50 captives in return for a 3-day ceasefire that will help improve emergency aid shipments to Gaza civilians, citing an official briefed on the talks. The official said general outlines had been agreed, but that Israel was still negotiating details at the time. On Saturday, a tentative agreement had been reached to free the women and children among the captives in exchange for a pause in fighting, reports said, adding that all parties will pause combat operations for at least 5 days, with the captives to be released in small groups. The White House has denied the reports, which said discussions on a deal were continuing. On Sunday, United States President Joe Biden said he was not in a position to say when the captives might be freed. "I want to make sure they are out, and I will tell you," he said at an event in Virginia. On Sunday, Sheikh Mohammed said that such reports were counterproductive and that the negotiating process went through ups and downs. The talks are continuing as Israel prepares to expand its ground offensive against Hamas into Gaza's southern half. The U.S., Israel's main ally, has urged caution as Gaza's 2.3 million people struggle to find anywhere safe to stay out of line of fire. The civilian death toll in Gaza was staggering and unacceptable, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said on Sunday as he renewed his appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. Israel has so far refused all calls for a ceasefire. Still on his Israel-Hamas conflict, Emmanuel Macron, French president, has told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu there were too many civilian losses in Israel's war in Gaza as Paris prepared more humanitarian support for the besieged enclave. Israel has said it wants to destroy the Palestinian enclave after it killed closely 1,200 people and took hundreds more captive in a surprise assault on October 7th. According to the United Nations, over 13,000 people in Gaza, some 70% of women and children have been killed in the air and land offensive. Hospitals, schools and refugee settlements have also come under sustained attack. The French president reminded Netanyahu of the absolute necessity to distinguish terrorists from the population and the importance of achieving an immediate humanitarian truce leading to a ceasefire, according to a statement from Macron's office on Sunday. Macron also condemned violence against Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank. The statement said over 200 Palestinians have been killed there since Israel started its war in Gaza. The French leader told Netanyahu about his great concern over the escalation in violence against Palestinian civilians in the occupied West Bank and called for calm. Macron also spoke to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who is from the Palestinian Authority, which controls the West Bank. He told Abbas of the need for the Palestinian Authority and all countries in the region to unequivocally and with the greatest firmness condemn the terrorist attack carried out by Hamas in Israel on October 7th. Macron earlier on Sunday announced fresh humanitarian aid for Gaza, where there are rising fears of starvation. The president said France will send an aircraft with over 10 tons of medical supplies at the start of the week and will contribute to European Union medical aid flights on November 23rd and 30th. It is also preparing a second hospital ship, the helicopter carrier Dixmude, which will arrive in Egypt in the coming days. French planes delivered 54 tons of aid for Gaza via Egypt earlier this month. Still sticking with the war, according to reports, a recent draft of a possible deal to secure the release of hostages that Hamas is holding in Gaza proposes a 4 to 5 day halt in fighting for the initial release of 50 hostages. An agreement has yet to be hit and the text of a deal has been traded back and forth for weeks, but mediators from various countries, including senior Biden administration officials, are stating sporadic optimism about the progress. Gaps in some of the major sticking points have started to close, sources say, and while the talks could still break down, an agreement may now be days away. In a sign of how vague the talks have been, reports said in recent days Hamas had put the negotiations on hold at least once. One of the numerous issues that the terrorist group raised and that appeared to have provoked Hamas abruptly going dark amidst the talks was Israel's raid of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza, but the negotiations eventually picked back up. One vital issue yet to be settled is how to implement the deal, including around aid shipments to Gaza. One source familiar with the negotiations said on Sunday, on the heels of a meeting between Qatar's Prime Minister and Brett McGurk, the White House coordinator for the Middle East affairs. Qatar has served as a major speaker in these meetings. The most recent deliberations have proposed the sudden release of civilian hostages, with holds potentially growing after Hamas agrees for an initial release of a substantial number of those captured, according to the sources. Israel has presented a list of roughly 100 civilian hostages it wants included in the agreement, reports said. Israel has publicly demanded that all hostages be released. Hamas showed it will be willing to release 50 hostages over a multi-day hold. More hostages, around 20 to 25, could be released after that as the pauses are extended. Hamas has said it needs stops in fighting to gather the hostages who are being held in different places and by different Hamas-allied groups in Gaza. There are still details to be worked out over aid, with Israel expressing concern that aid could go to help Hamas rather than civilians. Hamas initially requested 500 trucks of aid per day, reports said. No agreement has been reached on how many aid trucks will enter Gaza, but that over 200 trucks has logistically challenging. There are also questions about how to inspect the trucks and which points of entry will be used. The aid, including fuel and cooking oil for bakeries, will continue to flow in after the initial pauses for hostages. Still on Israel-Gaza war, 31 infants moved from Al-Shifa Hospital. On Sunday, 31 babies were evacuated from Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza in a high-stakes operation that involved numerous international agencies rushing the newborns in ambulances through active fighting as fears remain for their survival. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society, PCRS, said it worked with many other organizations to transport the babies to the Al-Halal Al-Marati Maternity Hospital in southern Gaza, and an Egyptian government. The babies will be transported to Egypt on Monday, reports said. Al-Shifa, the major hospital in Gaza, has become a flashpoint in Israel's war in the besieged enclave. The Israeli military alleges the facility is being used by Hamas as a shield for operations and raided the hospital last Wednesday. Hamas and hospital officials have denied Israel's claims. A joint United Nations humanitarian assessment team visited the hospital for an hour on Saturday and described it as a death zone, according to a statement from the World Health Organization, WHO. Corridors in the hospital grounds were filled with medical and solid waste, increasing the risk of infection. Patients and health staff with whom they spoke were terrified for their safety and health and pleaded for evacuation, the statement said. For days, continuous bombardment close to the hospital trapped thousands of staff, patients and civilians sheltering inside, stoking public outcry, especially as details emerged of newborn babies fighting for their lives. Palestinian authorities said numerous newborns have died due to power outages and a shortage of medical supplies. Hospital staff described having to move babies by hand from incubators after running out of fuel and wrapping them in foil to keep them warm. The 31 evacuated babies are now in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, which lies on the strip's border with Egypt, near the Rafah crossing that has been used to bring in limited aid and evacuate foreign nationals. It was hoped that the parents of the newborns will be able to travel safely with their children, but the WHO said very few of the infants were accompanied by their family members. Gazan officials had limited information and were not able to find close family members, according to WHO. The strong fighting between Israel and Hamas and a communications blackout across the enclave due to a lack of fuel has intricate aid delivery efforts and made it more difficult for Palestinians to reach relief services. The 31 evacuated babies are all fighting serious infections, said the WHO, citing doctors at the Rafah hospital where they are being treated. The World Health Organization said 11 of the babies are in critical condition, adding that the babies had fallen ill due to the lack of medical supplies at Shifa Hospital. We are conducting tests on all those babies and they were given fluids and needed medication according to their condition, said Dr. Mohammed Salama, one of the doctors at Al-Halal Al-Marati Maternity Hospital. On Sunday, UNICEF, which worked with other United Nations agencies and PCRS to carry out the evacuation, cautioned that the baby's condition was rapidly deteriorating. Their evacuation during extremely dangerous conditions follows the tragic death of several other babies and total collapse of all medical services at Al-Shifa, it said in a statement. On Sunday, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said further missions were being planned to evacuate the remaining patients and staff from Al-Shifa pending guarantees of safe passage by parties to the conflicts. Away from Israel-Palestine conflict now to the shores of Africa, South Africa desperate to get voters back to elections. On Saturday, South Africa held the first major voter registration drive in a bid to challenge excessive apathy ahead of national elections next year. Polling stations across the country opened their doors to let would-be voters register or check their details as part of a two-day exercise to woo electors back to the ballots after years of dwindling participation. Since South Africans jubilantly queued to cast their ballots in the first democratic elections in 1994, voter numbers have reduced every 5 years. At the last elections in 2019, only 49% of those of voting age showed up on election day. Young people in particular have stayed away. Only 15% of all eligible voters aged 18 to 19 and 30% of 20 to 29 years olds cast a vote in 2019, calling out the 14 million unregistered youth time to step up. The Electoral Commission wrote on social media on Saturday, urging young people to gather their squad and hit a registration station. Now we take a quick break, and when we come back, I'll bring you more stories from Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. Thanks for staying with us. Now, from Nigeria, APC-PDP clash as appeal court sacks Mutfwang. Last Thursday, the appellate court nullified the election of another PDP governor, Dauda Lawal of Zamfara State, declaring that the governorship election in the state was inconclusive. Caleb Mutfwang was the third opposition governor to be sacked by the Court of Appeal within 3 days. The following day, the same court invalidated the election of the Kano State governor, Abba Kabir Yusuf of the New Nigeria People's Party and NPP. The PDP deputy legal advisor Ukechukwu Osoha declared that the recent court judgments were not in tandem with the law, concerned by the consequential losses suffered by the governors and lawmakers at the courts. But the director of publicity for the APC, Bala Ibrahim, retorted that it was people who did not understand how the judicial process works that were accusing both the APC and the presidency of trying to turn Nigeria into a one-party state. Mutfwang of the PDP had got 525,299 votes, while the candidate of the APC, Nentawe Goshwe, polled 481,370 votes in the March 18 governorship election in the state. Goshwe challenged the victory of Mutfwang at the tribunal, claiming that the governor was not validly nominated and sponsored by his party. He also said there was non-compliance with the Electoral Act in the election. The Governorship Election Petition Tribunal had dismissed his petition for lacking in merit, but Goshwe headed to the appellate court. Justice Williams Dawudu in the lead judgment, however, set aside the decision of the tribunal. The judge held that Mutfwang was not validly sponsored by the PDP and that he was not qualified to have contested the election because the PDP did not conduct valid state, local government and ward congresses ordered by a High Court of Plateau State, and he had no structures as at the time of the election. Citing Section 177 of the Constitution, she held that the governor was not validly sponsored by the PDP during the election. She held that the party dishonored the court order directing it to conduct a valid congress in the 17 local government areas of the state. Williams Dawudu said there was no evidence that the PDP complied with the subsisting High Court order, which had directed it to conduct the party congress prior to its sponsorship of the governorship and other candidates. The court held that the issue of qualification is both a pre-election and a post-election matter, contrary to the findings of the tribunal, which held that the appellate lacked the locus to contest the validity of the respondent. The court also noted that under Section 134 of the Electoral Act, it is the single right of a political party to sponsor its candidate having met the essential requirements to do so. She then ordered INEC to retrieve the certificate of return issued to the governor and issue a fresh certificate of return to Nentawe Goshwe. And finally, on the news, still on judicial matters, Supreme Court Justice nominations spark conflict. The nomination of 22 justices of the Supreme Court appointment is talking chaos in the judiciary. This is because some senior serving and retired justices are daggers drawn over the list released last Thursday by the Federal Judicial Service Commission, FJSC. A senior justice said, according to reports, that President Bola Tinubu may be heading towards direct opposition with a broader section of senior members of the Nigerian bench, saying that never in the history of Nigeria has appointment of Supreme Court justices been this politicized. The case of North Central Zone, where the son of a former Chief Justice of Nigeria, CJN, was lined up as a priority, while a senior jurist with over 15 years experience in the Court of Appeal is placed as reserve, is controversial, another justice said, adding that the oddest of the ongoing process is that the South-South slot, where the person pronounced as the very best, is inquisitively penciled as reserve. Sources said during the processing phase, the justice placed as priority was not shortlisted among the 4 that were sent to the FJSC. In the Northwest, some justices questioned how Justice A.B. Gumel was dropped from the list despite being the number 1 on the list of juries from his zone. In the Southwest, the justice who was a reserve candidate in 2019 is still on the reserve list, while the justice who had never made the shortlist was placed as a priority. If not immediately tackled, some senior members of the Nigerian judiciary feared that the low morale and rancor in the judiciary would exacerbate. However, Professor Yemi Ekisaye George San, a renowned academic and a respected member of the inner bar, lauded the FJSC's list that became public knowledge last Thursday. He said it is, though possible for human error to have filtered into the list, he nonetheless said he could score the list 99.9%. The Silk also said he was comfortable with no candidates from both legal practice and academia made the list, saying any legal practitioner who wants to become a justice of the Supreme Court should start from the High Court. He said Justice Nikki Toby, who was a professor of law from the academia who did not start at the Apex Court, and that he did very well. He also said numerous legal practitioners nowadays are party goers with a lot of friends and clients everywhere with love for money, qualities he claimed are antithetical to what he should be found in a judge. To refresh our memories, Lai picks Taiwan's ex-US envoy as running mate. Argentina elects reformist outsider Javier Milei. Qatar Prime Minister says minor hurdles to Israel-Hamas captive deal. Macron to Netanyahu, excessive civilian losses in Gaza, and deal for release of dozens held hostage by Hamas still ongoing. And that's all on the news. Thanks for watching. Have a great week ahead.